Ole Miss beat Georgia. Ole Miss beat Georgia in a game where we thought the wrong team was favored. We talked about this a whole lot going into last week. We took a fair amount of criticism for it. I scanned the Georgia boards. I saw the slander that was being hurled our way. And you know what? Hey, to the discredit of our Ole Miss brethren, you didn't exactly have our back. Lane Kiffin did, though. The Ole Miss football team did, though. This was a 3-Chalai game on a 1 to 5 scale. Pretty entertaining, really entertaining if you were Ole Miss. And I think somewhat jarring to the senses of a general, sort of more casual college football fan. The wrong team was favored in the game. The model thought it. I thought it. I thought it was a horrible matchup for Georgia. Didn't trust the team going in. And look, Ole Miss, as much as they got skull-drug in this game last year, all it did was motivate them to build a team that was the antithesis of last year. And you kind of saw it on display. How much did Lane Kiffin overhaul Ole Miss between last year's 52-17 beatdown and this year? Well, I'll tell you how much. This game started horrifically for Ole Miss, and they still won comfortably. I just want you to visualize it. Now, if we're talking Friday afternoon, you and I get off work early and we go get some lunch, and we're just kind of talking through the Ole Miss-Georgia game. Man, Rebels, 2.5-point dog at home, huh? Interesting. And then I rub the magic 8 ball and I say, I've seen the spoilers. I know how this game starts. And I tell you, Jackson Dart's going to get pressured on the first 3 plays. Georgia's going to get home with a sack. They're going to force an interception. Dart's going to go to the locker room like he's out of the game early. Georgia's going to start in plus territory. They're going to convert on 4th down and 4th and goal, and they're going to get a touchdown. They're going to go up 7-0, and then you're going to insert a freshman quarterback, and it's rainy and it's nasty. And that same Georgia defense that went on the road and handled Texas in Austin is the one across from you. And what do? Well, what you do is you go on a 28-3 run the rest of the way. Aren't many teams that can do that. Ole Miss is one of them. Ole Miss has been mischaracterized after that LSU loss. They've been misunderstood, and I will tell you now, they're still being misunderstood. What a backbone game for Ole Miss. Could have been a backbreaker game. It was a backbone game for Ole Miss. And you know what? I just said, and I'm going to say again, and I'll probably reiterate it at least once more in the next couple of minutes, people still don't know what this team is. I still don't think most of America has the slightest idea what the ceiling is. You look at Ole Miss and you think, Lane Kiffin, always good for a tweet every now and then. That Ole Miss offense, they can put up some fireworks every now and then. They're a good story. You know, Ole Miss, good, solid story. And maybe they'll mess around and be in it at the end. Well, if that's the way you see Ole Miss, you and I see Ole Miss differently. And I'm a noted Ole Miss hater. Remember, the internet has labeled me long ago as an Ole Miss hater. So if even I, documented Ole Miss hater, am telling you that, then it must be true. Dripping with sarcasm there. But first, let's just discuss Georgia. Everyone wants to know what's wrong with Georgia. Josh, what's happening with Georgia? Georgia has no answers offensively. That's a problem. I guess that's what's wrong with them. Georgia is basically Rick Vaughn in Major League 2. Rick Vaughn in Major League 1 could bring the heat. He'd hit 100 on the gun. You had no clue where the ball was going. He had the skull and crossbones in the middle of his glasses, and he was the best closer in the game. And then Major League 2 rolls around, and he tops out at 87, and Parkman takes him deep all over the place, and he's got pitches named after all sorts of different things, but there's really no answer. He has no answer. He's got to reinvent himself, or in that case, refine himself. And boy, you hope Georgia can do that, but they're running out of time. They drop the ball too much. Their offensive line's been banged up, but their offensive line's been bad. Been bad by normal standards. Been horrifically bad by Georgia standards. Carson Beck is not a strength for this team, which he absolutely should be, and he's just not. They cannot run it. Yesterday, even when I adjust the sack yardage out, they still only ran for 3 yards per carry. But after you say all that, you got to understand these are not coaches that go work at the lumberyard, get off at 4:45, and rush over to practice. It's not a hobby of theirs. It's not something they do for the rec department on the side. These guys get paid a lot of money. And when I say that, all I'm saying that to indicate is you've got to find answers. You got to do it because you know good and well you turn on your TV every Saturday. You guys, if you're at Georgia, you go into a bye week. You know if you're honest with yourself, you turn on the TV, You flip through the channels, ESPN, CBS, NBC, FS1, whatever, Peacock, and you see a team that's less talented than you, and that staff is finding ways to scheme guys open, and they're finding ways through design, through scheme, through proper utilization of the personnel they do have to grind out 26 points on a given Saturday, and then hopefully it'll be enough. And then you're sitting there and you are Georgia, and you can't get it done. And sometimes it's a consequence of success because you've gotten so used to everything going your way and things fall and the mechanisms operate properly. And so when they don't, and you got to lift the hood, sometimes you don't have as much grease under your fingernails as some of these other guys on other staffs around the country. And that's not uncommon. That's not a problem that's unique to Georgia. You see that sometimes. You watch when you've got a bunch of 4- and 5-star talent, for example, and it looks like you can't get out of your own way offensively, and then you'll turn on a MAC game on Tuesday night, and I mean, these guys look like they're coming from the circus, calling plays, or as the message board community would label it, imaginative play calling. Never understood what that means. We need to be more imaginative in our play calling. Well, if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. But you got to find something that works. Georgia's sitting here and still has everything in front of them. There's no doubt if they win out, they're going to the college football playoff. Whether they'll be in Atlanta or not, I don't know. There's no doubt about that. They got Tennessee coming into town Saturday. Just point blank. It is a gut check game. It's a gut check moment for them this Saturday. They got to win. And you play complimentary to do it, then so be it. If Carson Beck needs to step up and not throw the ball to the other team or put the ball on the ground, or your tailbacks need to do the same thing, you got to do that. And your coaching staff's got to put guys in proper position. Everybody knows this. They know this. It's not like anyone watches this show and says, well, we never thought of that. Wow. It's just doing it. It's not knowing it, it's doing it. But back to Ole Miss for a second. Most of you probably watched this game unless you were going to another game yesterday. People watch this Ole Miss team, and even after seeing Ole Miss do this to Georgia, I still get the distinct impression people have no clue what this Ole Miss team is. I've listened to some folks. I've listened to some of my friends refer to this Ole Miss team as this cute story, and they got up off the deck after that LSU loss, and they found a way to beat Georgia, and that's great. And I had one of my buddies say earlier today, I could see Ole Miss winning a playoff game. I could see them winning the national championship. So I'm with you, and then some. Why do people doubt this? Do you think it's a chaotic year or not? Do you think it's been a very parity-driven 2024 or not? Because if you believe that, then a flawed team could end up on top of this whole thing. I just ask you, what are you looking at when you see Ole Miss? Like, you look at them as they're a cute story, and, maybe they could be a fun wild card and win a game when they get in the playoff. They could win the national title, and I'll tell you why. Because they've got a mobile threat and a dynamic quarterback who's got experience, and he's played in the same system for a number of years. You got assassins at wide receiver who any given game could take over. You got a tailback when healthy that you can depend on, really a couple of them. You may have the most dynamic defensive front in America. Ask Kirby Smart about that because they had to deal with him yesterday. And they're very, very plus on special teams, which won't get talked about as much. But a lot of folks, if you believe in 3 phases of football, you need to pay attention to that oft-forgotten 3rd phase. Smart said yesterday after the game that he felt collectively it was the most talented team they've played all year, which is notable. Because Georgia's gone to Alabama and played this year, and Georgia's gone to Texas and played this year, and the head coach of said team chose to label Ole Miss as collectively the most talented team they've played. This team could win it all. They could miss the playoff, but they could also win it all. They're plenty dynamic enough. They're plenty talented enough. And I give them full credit because, man, my biggest question coming out of that LSU game, they went into the bye. Remember this? They go into the bye, and the question to me was not how good were they. I never dropped them out of my top 10 in power ratings, but that didn't matter if they mailed it in. Well, they didn't. They didn't. Actually, what it looks like they've done is they've rounded into form of playing their best football. I mean, they didn't trail the LSU game for 1 second, but lost the game. And the Kentucky game earlier in the year is just inexcusable. Can't lose that game. But again, we are talking about a year where a bunch of teams that are going to be there in the end have that kind of game, have that kind of loss on their resume. So I give Lane Kiffin full credit. I give that staff full credit. Most importantly, you got to give the players full credit because they They've kind of taken ownership of that team. They could do some big things. That's not a cute story. Penn State's the kind of team that could get into the playoff and win a game. But ultimately, there's a ceiling on the team. There's not a ceiling on Ole Miss. I really encourage people to go watch them. That is one of the most dangerous teams in the country right now, and that's not a guarantee of anything, and that's not it's not even a prediction of anything. It's just, man, if they get in there, I would. That's the one maybe I'd least like to play, because that's the one that's probably least predictable if they do get in there. And by the way, we got a lot of people tuned in live. I know a lot of people may be watching this individual video. Do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. If you're here already, you know you didn't pay anything. It's free. We would love to keep it that way. We do nonstop college football all year. And to help us do that, all you really need to do is subscribe to the YouTube channel or the podcast. It's free. No strings attached. No mailer 2 weeks later. Spam in your email inbox. None of that. It just helps us.